At my graduation, my father announced he was cutting me off. "You're not my real daughter anyway." The room gasped. I smiled, walked to the podium and said, "Since we're sharing DNA secrets." I pulled out an envelope. His wife's face turned white as I revealed, "You're not my real daughter anyway." The words hit the graduation ceremony like a bomb. Every conversation stopped. Every phone stopped recording. Even the baby in the third row stopped crying. I stood there on the gymnasium floor, halfway to the stage, my name still echoing from the speakers. Zoe Richardson. That was supposed to be my cue to walk across, shake hands, grab my diploma, and smile for the cameras like every other graduate today. Instead, my adoptive father had just disowned me in front of 400 people. Before we continue with this explosive family drama, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these powerful stories of standing up for yourself. If you believe everyone deserves respect and the truth should never be hidden, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. "I'm cutting you off, permanently," Ethan continued, his voice carrying across the dead-silent auditorium. He was standing in the fourth row, arms crossed like he was delivering a business presentation. No college fund. No family support. Nothing. The gasp started then. Whispered, "Oh my gods, and did he really just say that?" rippled through the crowd. I could see phones turning toward us, recording everything. Tomorrow this would be all over social media. The girl who got dumped by her dad at graduation. Except they had no idea what was really happening here. Michelle, his wife, was tugging at his sleeve, hissing something I couldn't hear. Her face had gone white as her designer dress. The baby in her arms, his baby according to Ethan, started fussing again like even he could sense the tension. I should have been devastated. Should have run off that gymnasium floor in tears. That's what Ethan expected. That's what everyone expected. Dad, I smiled. Not a sad, broken smile. Not an embarrassed, apologetic smile. A real one. The kind that made my eyes crinkle at the corners. The kind Caitlin used to say lit up my whole face. Because Ethan had just given me the perfect opening. "Well," I said loud enough for the microphone to pick up my voice, "since we're sharing family secrets." I reached into my graduation folder and pulled out a white envelope. The same envelope I'd been carrying around for 3 weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. The same envelope that contained information that would destroy Ethan's perfect little world. The principal tried to wave me toward the diploma table, clearly wanting to move past this awkward interruption. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I walked to the podium instead. "Since Ethan wants to talk about DNA," I said, adjusting the microphone, "let me share something interesting about genetics." The auditorium was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. Every single person was leaning forward in their seats. This was better than any graduation speech they'd expected. Michelle's face wasn't just white anymore. It was gray. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing "no" over and over. The baby had started crying again, but she didn't seem to notice. "You're absolutely right," I continued, looking directly at Ethan. "I'm not your biological daughter. I've always known that. Caitlin told me when I was 12 and she made sure I understood how much I was wanted and loved." Ethan's confident posture wavered slightly. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. "But here's the thing about DNA secrets," I said, holding up the envelope. "Sometimes the people throwing stones live in the biggest glass houses." I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately. The rustling paper sounded impossibly loud in the silent gymnasium. "Your son, that precious baby boy you've been showing off for the past 6 months, isn't actually your son." The explosion of gasps and whispers was immediate. People were standing up, craning their necks to see better. Phones were recording from every angle. "Michelle has been having an affair with your brother Jason for over a year," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "The baby she's holding right now? That's your nephew, not your son." Ethan's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his seat like someone had cut his strings. His mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. Michelle made a choking noise and bolted for the exit, still carrying the baby. She was running, actually running, through the rows of chairs, stumbling over people's feet in her designer heels. "I have the DNA test results right here," I said, waving the papers. "Conclusive proof. 99.9% certainty. Your wife's child is genetically your brother's son." The gymnasium erupted into chaos. People were talking over each other, pointing, standing on chairs to get a better view. My classmates on the stage were frozen, their own graduation forgotten in favor of this unexpected drama. But I wasn't finished. "Oh, and Michelle?" I called out, even though she was almost to the doors. "You might want to be more careful where you leave your hotel receipts. And your jewelry receipts. And your restaurant receipts from all those lunch dates with Jason." She stumbled, nearly dropping the baby, but kept running. The heavy gymnasium doors slammed behind her with a sound like thunder. I turned back to Ethan, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. His face had gone from confident to confused to completely shattered in the span of 2 minutes. "You wanted to cut me off?" I said, my voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "You wanted to humiliate me in public? You wanted to make sure everyone knew I wasn't really part of your family?" I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. "Well, congratulations. You just gave me the perfect opportunity to return the favor." The crowd was going wild now. People were recording, taking pictures, already posting on social media. This would be viral within the hour. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Ethan Richardson, successful businessman, pillar of the community, had been played by his own wife and brother. I tucked the DNA results back into my folder and walked to the diploma table. The principal, looking completely overwhelmed, handed me my degree with shaking hands. "Congratulations, Miss Richardson," he whispered. "Thank you," I said, posing for the official photo as if nothing had happened. "It's been a memorable day." As I walked off the stage, diploma in hand, I could hear Ethan behind me. He was calling my name, his voice cracked and desperate. "Zoe, wait. Please. We need to talk." But I didn't turn around. I didn't stop walking. I'd spent 18 years waiting for his approval, his acceptance, his love. I'd spent months planning for this exact moment, knowing that sooner or later he'd try to push me out of his life. I just never expected him to make it so easy. The trap he'd set for me, the public humiliation, the calculated cruelty, had backfired spectacularly. He'd wanted to cut me loose quietly, to make me disappear without a fuss. Instead, he'd given me the perfect stage for my revenge. And the best part? Every single word I'd said was true. The DNA test, the affair, the hotel receipts. I had proof of everything. Months of careful investigation, of following Michelle, of collecting evidence. Ethan thought he was so smart, so strategic. He thought he could manipulate me the way he'd manipulated everyone else in his life. He was wrong. As I pushed through the gymnasium doors, I could still hear the chaos behind me. People shouting questions, phones ringing, the principal trying desperately to restore order. But I was done with all of it. Done with Ethan, done with his fake family, done with pretending to be grateful for scraps of affection. I had my diploma, I had my scholarship to Columbia, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, the best revenge is simply the truth. The parking lot was almost empty. Everyone was still inside, glued to their seats by the drama. I walked to my beat-up Honda, tossed my graduation cap in the backseat and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I could see people starting to spill out of the gymnasium, talking excitedly, phones pressed to their ears. I smiled again and drove away. Let them talk. Let the whole town talk. I was finally free. The drive home from graduation took 15 minutes, but my mind traveled back 18 years in those few miles. As I pulled into my apartment complex, the small one-bedroom I'd been renting since turning 18, memories flooded back like water through a broken dam. I was 2 when they brought me home. Too young to remember the actual adoption, but old enough that the house never felt completely mine. Caitlin showed me the photo albums later. Me as a toddler, chubby-cheeked and shy, clinging to her leg while Ethan stood in the background looking like he was posing for a business portrait rather than a family picture. Caitlin was everything a mother should be. She hummed while folding laundry, sang off-key in the shower, and read me bedtime stories with different voices for every character. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical, turning grocery shopping into treasure hunts, rainy afternoons into fort-building adventures. Our house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh flowers because she believed homes should feel like hugs. Ethan was different. Not mean exactly, but distant. Clinical. Like he was observing our family from the outside rather than participating in it. At school events, other dads would ruffle their kids' hair or swing them around. Ethan would shake hands with teachers and check his watch. When people asked about me, he'd say, "This is Zoe, with the same tone he'd used to introduce a business associate. I noticed it more as I got older. How he never called me his daughter. How family dinners felt like board meetings where I was expected to report on grades, activities, achievements. How our rare family vacations were always cut short by work calls that somehow couldn't wait. But Caitlin balanced it out. She made up for his emotional absence with double the love, double the attention, double the pride in my accomplishments. She came to every school play, every science fair, every softball game where I mostly sat on the bench. She was my safe harbor in a house that often felt more like a hotel. Then everything changed when I was 14. Caitlin had been sick for months, though she tried to hide it. I'd catch her wincing when she thought no one was looking, or find her napping in the middle of the day when she was usually bustling around the house. The cancer moved fast once it started, and by the time the doctors caught it, there wasn't much they could do. I'll never forget the night she died. I was sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, when she squeezed my fingers one last time and whispered, "Remember, sweetheart. You were wanted. You were chosen. Don't let anyone tell you different." Ethan cried at her funeral. Real, ugly, broken sobs that made his shoulders shake. But when I tried to comfort him, to share in our grief, he pulled away. It wasn't until later that I realized he wasn't just mourning Caitlin, he was mourning his buffer. The person who'd made our awkward family dynamic work. Without her, we were just two strangers living in the same house. The silence in our home became deafening. Dinners were eaten without conversation. Caitlin's empty chair sat between us like a chasm. I tried to fill the quiet with updates about school, friends, anything that might spark some connection. Ethan would nod and make appropriate sounds, but his eyes were always somewhere else. 6 months after the funeral, he brought Michelle home. She was nothing like Caitlin. Where my mom had been soft and nurturing, Michelle was sharp and polished. She wore heels to the grocery store and never had a hair out of place. Her laugh was too loud, her smile too perfect, her interest in me too obviously fake. "Oh, you must be the daughter," she'd gushed the first time we met, like I was some curious artifact rather than a grieving teenager. "Ethan's told me so much about you." He hadn't, of course. I could tell by the way she fumbled for details about my life, asking generic questions about school and hobbies like she was following a script. They married 8 months later. Small ceremony, just immediate family and a few business associates. I wore the black dress Caitlin had bought me for formal events, and Michelle made passive-aggressive comments about my gothic phase to anyone who'd listen. The house changed after Michelle moved in. Caitlin's vanilla candles were replaced with expensive diffusers that smelled like department stores. Her cozy reading nooks became stark display areas for Michelle's collection of crystal figurines. Even the family photos changed. Our pictures with Caitlin were quietly relocated to less prominent positions, replaced by professional portraits of Ethan and Michelle looking like they belonged in a magazine spread. Then came the pregnancy announcement. I was 16, sitting at the breakfast table with a bowl of cereal, when Michelle placed her hand on her still flat stomach and smiled that perfect smile. "We're going to have a baby," she announced like she was delivering news about the weather. Ethan's face lit up in a way I'd never seen before. Pure joy, genuine excitement, the kind of expression I'd spent years hoping to inspire. He swept Michelle into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested that he'd make her dizzy. I sat there, spoon halfway to my mouth, watching this display of happiness that had nothing to do with me. For the first time in my life, I truly understood that I was the outsider in this family. The placeholder. The obligation that had been fulfilled but never embraced. "This is our second chance," Ethan said later that evening, his hand resting protectively on Michelle's stomach. "Our chance to do it right." The implication was clear. I had been practice. A trial run. This baby would be the real thing. That's when I started pulling away. I spent more time at the library, staying until closing time and walking home through quiet neighborhoods where I could think. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, partly for the money but mostly for the excuse to be somewhere else. School became my sanctuary. Clubs, study groups, volunteer work, anything to avoid going home to watch Ethan and Michelle play house. The baby arrived on a Tuesday in March. A boy, perfect and healthy with dark hair and curious eyes. They named him Marcus and Ethan cried again. Happy tears this time. He held his son like he was made of spun glass, whispering promises about all the things they'd do together, all the ways he'd be a good father. I watched from the hospital room doorway, invisible as always, and wondered if he'd ever held me that way when I was small. But it was during those late-night hospital visits that I first noticed something odd. Jason, Ethan's younger brother, seemed to spend an awful lot of time at the hospital. More time than most uncles anyway. He brought flowers, expensive gifts, and always managed to find excuses to hold the baby when Ethan wasn't around. I started paying closer attention after that. Jason owned a successful tech company and had never married, never had kids of his own. He was charming, wealthy, and had always been Michelle's favorite topic of conversation at family dinners. Too favorite, maybe. The pieces started fitting together slowly like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Late-night phone calls that Michelle would end abruptly when someone entered the room. Shopping trips where she'd come home with bags from stores Jason had mentioned. The way she'd light up when his name came up in conversation, then quickly try to hide her reaction. 3 months after Marcus was born, I was supposed to be asleep when I heard Michelle talking on the phone in the kitchen. It was past midnight and she was whispering, but sound carried in our old house. "I told Jason not to send gifts here anymore," she was saying. "Ethan's getting suspicious about how much attention you're paying to the baby." My blood turned to ice. I crept closer to the kitchen doorway, pressing myself against the wall to listen. "I know you want to be involved," Michelle continued. "But we have to be careful. At least until Marcus is older. Then maybe we can figure out how to tell him the truth about his real father." I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, processing what I'd heard, trying to decide what to do with the information. Part of me wanted to march downstairs and confront them both. Part of me wanted to tell Ethan immediately. But another part of me, the part that had been watching and waiting and collecting slights for years, decided to be patient. To gather more evidence. To build a case that couldn't be denied or explained away. Because somewhere in the back of my mind a plan was already forming. A way to use this information when the time was right. When Ethan finally pushed me too far, when he made his inevitable move to cut me out of his life completely. I just had to wait for the perfect moment. As it turned out, graduation day was exactly that moment. That overheard phone call changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just a grieving teenager trying to navigate life with a distant stepmother. I was a detective living in my own home, watching for clues that would prove what I suspected. Michelle made it surprisingly easy. For someone having an affair, she was remarkably careless. Or maybe she just didn't think the quiet stepdaughter would notice anything. Either way, her behavior became a roadmap of deception once I knew what to look for. Take her Tuesday routine for instance. Every week, she'd announce over breakfast that she had a standing manicure appointment at the salon downtown. She'd leave at 10, dressed to perfection, and return around 2 with perfectly polished nails and shopping bags from expensive stores. But I started timing her trips and they never made sense. 20 minutes to drive downtown, maybe an hour for a manicure, 20 minutes back. That left almost 3 hours unaccounted for. So one Tuesday I decided to follow her. I called in sick to school, waited until she left, then took my beat-up Honda and tracked her route downtown. She didn't go to the salon. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of the Marriott Hotel on 5th Street. I watched from across the street as she walked through the lobby like she owned the place, confident and familiar. 20 minutes later, Jason's silver BMW pulled into the same lot. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Seeing it happen was different from suspecting it. This was real. This was happening in my family, right under Ethan's nose, and I was the only one who knew. I drove home and spent the rest of the day pretending I'd been sick in bed. When Michelle returned at her usual time, nails perfectly manicured and carrying bags from 3 different boutiques, I smiled and asked how her appointment went. "Oh, wonderful as always," she gushed, showing off her coral pink polish. "And I found the most adorable outfit for Marcus at that little children's store on Main Street." Lies came so easily to her. Each one delivered with that perfect smile, those bright eyes, that tone of voice that suggested butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. But the hotel visits were just the beginning. Once I started really watching, the evidence was everywhere. Her phone, for instance. Michelle was addicted to her cell phone, constantly texting and checking social media. But whenever Ethan entered a room, she'd flip it face down or slide it into her purse with suspicious speed. Normal people don't hide innocent text messages from their husbands. One evening, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to check on Marcus. I only had a few seconds, but it was enough to see Jason's name at the top of her recent messages. The preview showed just enough. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place, same, before the screen locked again. Then there were the gifts. Michelle had suddenly developed expensive taste in jewelry, and Ethan, generous as he was trying to be as a new father, couldn't possibly afford everything she was wearing. The diamond earrings that appeared after her doctor's appointment. The gold bracelet she claimed was a surprise from Ethan, that I'd seen Jason give to Caitlin 3 years earlier. That bracelet was what convinced me this wasn't just an affair. It was a complete betrayal of Caitlin's memory. Jason had given it to my mother for her birthday, and she'd worn it constantly until she got too sick to care about jewelry. After the funeral, it had disappeared from her jewelry box. Now it was wrapped around Michelle's wrist like a trophy. The phone calls got bolder too. Late at night, when she thought everyone was asleep, I'd hear her whispering in the kitchen. Always hushed, always secretive, always ending abruptly if she heard footsteps. One night I crept downstairs and caught fragments through the door. Told you Ethan doesn't suspect anything. Just have to be patient until Marcus is older. No, it's hard, but we can't risk. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, trying to catch every word. But Michelle was too careful, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Still, I heard enough to know my suspicions were right. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus himself. Babies don't lie. They can't manipulate or pretend or put on performances. As Marcus grew from a newborn to an infant, his features became more distinct. And anyone with eyes could see he looked nothing like Ethan. Where Ethan had blue eyes and straight brown hair, Marcus had dark, almost black eyes and hair that curled at the edges. His hands were long and slender like Jason's. His smile was lopsided in exactly the same way as his uncle's. Even his laugh, a distinctive musical giggle, was pure Jason. But the real giveaway came when Marcus was about 4 months old. Michelle was bouncing him on her lap, making silly faces to make him laugh when she slipped. "Come on, little Jay," she cooed. "Smile for mommy." Not Marcus. Short for Jason. She caught herself immediately, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. I was sitting at the kitchen table supposedly doing homework, but I'd heard every word. Our eyes met for just a second and I saw something flicker across her face. Fear maybe, or calculation. "I meant to say little guy," she said quickly, but her voice was too bright, too forced. That night I made my decision. Suspicions and overheard conversations weren't enough. If I was going to do anything with this information, I needed proof that couldn't be disputed or explained away. I needed science. Getting DNA samples was easier than I expected. Jason came for dinner the following Sunday, as he did most weekends. While he was playing with Marcus in the living room, I collected a few strands of hair from the bathroom he'd used. Ethan's hair came from his brush in the master bedroom, easy enough to grab when Michelle was busy elsewhere. Marcus's sample was the trickiest, but babies are constantly drooling and putting things in their mouths. I waited until Michelle left a pacifier on the coffee table and quietly slipped it into a plastic bag. Finding a DNA testing lab that would work with a 17-year-old was harder. Most required parental consent or legal documentation. But I found a small private lab across town that asked fewer questions when I paid in cash and explained it was for a school science project. The technician, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced at my samples. "Standard paternity test," she confirmed. "Results in 2 to 3 weeks. You'll get a call when they're ready." Those 3 weeks were torture. Every day I watched Michelle perform her charade of perfect wife and mother. I watched Ethan beam with pride over his son. I watched Jason visit just a little too often, hold Marcus just a little too long, and look at Michelle with just a little too much intensity. And every day I wondered what I would do when the results came back. Would I tell Ethan immediately? Confront Michelle privately? Keep the information as insurance for some future crisis? The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was at work at the bookstore when my phone rang. "Miss Richardson? This is Linda from Accuracy Labs. Your test results are ready for pickup." My hands trembled as I hung up. This was it. The moment of truth. Once I saw those results, there would be no going back, no pretending I didn't know what I knew. I drove to the lab after work, my stomach churning with nerves. Linda handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. "Everything you need is in there," she said. "The results are pretty conclusive." I sat in my car in the lab parking lot, staring at the envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend none of this had ever happened. Instead, I drove home and hid the envelope in my bedroom, tucked between the pages of my old copy of Jane Eyre, Caitlin's favorite book, the one she'd read to me countless times when I was small. It seemed fitting somehow, hiding evidence of one family's secrets inside a story about another orphaned girl finding her place in the world. I didn't open the envelope. Not that day, not that week, not even when graduation day arrived. Because somewhere in the back of my mind I knew I was saving it for something. Some moment when I would need it most. Some moment when Ethan would finally push me too far, and I would need the perfect weapon to push back. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. The envelope sat in my Jane Eyre book for 2 weeks like a loaded gun waiting to be fired. I could have opened it a dozen times, could have confronted Michelle or told Ethan privately. But some instinct told me to wait. To let Ethan make the first move. That move came on graduation morning. I was in my bedroom getting ready for the ceremony, when I heard raised voices downstairs. Michelle's sharp tone cut through the walls. "You can't be serious about this, Ethan. She's your daughter." "Adopted daughter," Ethan corrected coldly. "And it's time she learned to stand on her own feet. I've supported her long enough." I crept to the top of the stairs, listening as they argued in the kitchen. Marcus was crying in his high chair, probably sensing the tension. But cutting off her college fund? Michelle pressed. "Today? At graduation?" "The timing is perfect," Ethan replied. "Public. Final. No room for negotiation or emotional manipulation later. She needs to understand that she's not entitled to anything just because we gave her a roof over her head." My blood turned to ice. He'd been planning this. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of frustration. It was calculated. He wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone, to make sure I'd never have the courage to ask him for anything ever again. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing my best outfit, not for him but for me. If this was going to be my final performance as Ethan Richardson's daughter, I was going to look the part. I slipped the DNA results into my graduation folder, right next to my speech notes that I knew I'd never get to read. The drive to school was tense. Michelle kept glancing back at me in the rearview mirror, her usual bright chatter replaced by nervous silence. Ethan stared straight ahead, his jaw set in that way that meant his mind was made up. Marcus babbled happily in his car seat, the only innocent one among us. In the gymnasium, I watched families claiming their seats, cameras ready, proud faces beaming. The Hendersons had brought balloons. The Patel family had made a banner. Normal families celebrating normal achievements. Ethan chose seats in the 4th row, close enough to be seen, far enough back to make an easy exit. He sat with his arms crossed, checking his phone repeatedly. Michelle bounced Marcus on her lap, her smile bright but brittle. She kept adjusting her sunglasses, though the lighting inside was dim. I found my place with the other graduates, my heart pounding with anticipation rather than nerves. Around me, my classmates whispered excitedly about college plans and summer jobs. Jessica Chin was going to Stanford. Mike Rodriguez had landed an internship at Goldman Sachs. Everyone had futures mapped out, families supporting their dreams. The ceremony began with the principal's opening remarks, followed by the valedictorian's speech about new beginnings and endless possibilities. I barely heard the words. My focus was entirely on Ethan, watching for any sign of what was coming. When they started calling names alphabetically, the atmosphere in the gym became electric. Each graduate's moment was celebrated with cheers, applause, and camera flashes. Parents stood up, shouted encouragement, waved frantically. It was beautiful and heartwarming and everything graduation should be. Then came the R's. David Ramirez. Thunderous applause from a family of 8 who'd driven down from Chicago. Rebecca Reynolds. Her grandmother actually whistled through her fingers. Zoe Richardson. I stood up, smoothing my gown, and began the walk toward the stage. The gymnasium settled into that respectful quiet that accompanies each graduate's moment. This was supposed to be my time to shine, my moment of triumph after years of hard work. That's when Ethan stood up. Not to clap. Not to cheer. He rose from his seat like he was about to deliver a business presentation, his voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium. "You're not my real daughter anyway." The words hit like a physical blow. Every conversation stopped. Every phone that had been recording other graduates swiveled toward our section. Even the principal paused mid-gesture, unsure how to handle this unprecedented interruption. I'm cutting you off, permanently, Ethan continued, his voice steady and cold. No college fund. No family support. Nothing. You're 18 now. Time to learn what the real world is like. The gasp started immediately. Shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. I could see parents covering their children's ears, others reaching for their phones to record this unexpected drama. My classmates on stage stood frozen, their own celebration forgotten. Michelle was frantically tugging at Ethan's sleeve, her face pale with horror. Ethan, please, she hissed. Not here. Not like this. But he wasn't finished. She's not entitled to anything from this family. I've done my obligation. I've given her a home, an education, everything she needed to become independent. But she's not my blood and she never will be. The gymnasium had gone completely silent now. Even Marcus had stopped babbling, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. 400 people were witnessing my public disownment, and tomorrow it would be all over social media. I should have been devastated. Should have run from that gymnasium in tears. That's what Ethan expected. That's what everyone expected. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced before, pure crystalline clarity. This was my moment. Not the moment he'd planned for me, but the moment I'd been waiting for without knowing it. He'd just given me the perfect opening, the perfect stage, the perfect audience for what I was about to do. I walked to the podium instead of the diploma table. The principal tried to redirect me, but I shook my head gently. I need to say something, I said, my voice carrying through the microphone. The auditorium was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. Every single person was leaning forward, waiting to see how this would unfold. Since we're sharing family secrets, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I think it's only fair that everyone knows the whole truth. I reached into my graduation folder and pulled out the envelope. The same envelope that had been waiting patiently in my Jane Eyre book for 2 weeks. The same envelope that contained the ammunition I needed to turn this humiliation into something else entirely. You're absolutely right, Ethan, I continued, deliberately using his first name instead of calling him Dad. I'm not your biological daughter. I've always known that. My mother, my real mother, Caitlin, told me the truth when I was old enough to understand it. She made sure I knew how wanted I was, how loved I was. Ethan's confident posture began to waver. This wasn't going according to his script. But here's something you don't know about DNA and family secrets, I said, opening the envelope with deliberate slowness. Your son, that precious baby boy you've been showing off for the past 6 months, isn't your biological child either. The explosion of gasps and whispers was immediate. People were standing up, craning their necks to see better. Phones were recording from every angle. Michelle has been having an affair with your brother Jason for over a year, I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the chaos. The baby she's holding right now? That's your nephew, not your son. Ethan's face went through a series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. His legs seemed to give out and he collapsed back into his seat like someone had cut his strings. Michelle made a choking sound and bolted for the exit, still clutching Marcus. She was actually running through the rows of chairs, stumbling over people's feet in her designer heels. I have the DNA test results right here, I continued, holding up the official papers. 99.9% certainty. Your wife's child shares your DNA, but not in the way you think. Jason is the biological father. The gymnasium erupted into complete chaos. People were talking over each other, pointing, standing on chairs to get a better view. My classmates on stage were frozen, their mouths hanging open. But I wasn't finished. I looked directly at the doors where Michelle had disappeared. Oh, and Michelle, you might want to be more careful about where you leave your hotel receipts. And your jewelry receipts. And your lunch receipts from all those romantic dates with Jason. The heavy doors had already slammed shut behind her, but I knew she'd heard me. Everyone had heard me. I turned back to Ethan, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. His face had gone from confident to shattered in the span of 3 minutes. You wanted to cut me off? I said, my voice still carrying through the microphone. You wanted to humiliate me in public? You wanted to make sure everyone knew I wasn't really part of your family? I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. Well, congratulations. You just gave me the perfect opportunity to return the favor. I walked off that stage and straight out of the gymnasium, leaving behind a crowd still buzzing with shock and excitement. The parking lot felt surreal after the chaos inside. Quiet, peaceful, like stepping into a different world. I sat in my Honda for a moment, hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text after text, call after call. Classmates, friends, even people I barely knew were reaching out, wanting to know if what they'd witnessed was real. I turned the phone off and drove home in silence. By the time I got to my apartment, the story was already spreading beyond the gymnasium walls. Someone had live-streamed the entire confrontation on social media. Within hours, the video had thousands of views, comments, and shares. The headlines started appearing on local news websites. Graduation shocker. Student exposes family's dark secret. And DNA drama at high school ceremony. I watched it all unfold from my laptop, feeling strangely disconnected from the chaos I'd created. The girl in the video, confident, composed, delivering devastating news with surgical precision, barely felt like me. But there I was, watching myself destroy a family in real time. The media attention escalated quickly. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional ones. By Wednesday, I was getting calls from talk show producers and magazine writers. Everyone wanted an interview, wanted to know more about the graduation revenge that had captured the internet's attention. I ignored them all. What I couldn't ignore was the fallout for the people involved. Michelle had vanished completely. Neighbors reported seeing her load suitcases into her car the night after graduation, Marcus strapped into his car seat, and drive away without a word to anyone. Her social media accounts disappeared overnight. The perfect family life she'd curated so carefully was gone as if it had never existed. Jason's response was predictable: denial followed by damage control. He hired a lawyer and released a statement claiming the DNA test was fabricated, that this was all an elaborate hoax by a disturbed teenager seeking attention. But the evidence was too solid, too public. His business partners started asking uncomfortable questions. His carefully maintained reputation as a successful bachelor was crumbling. Ethan's reaction was the most dramatic. Within 48 hours of graduation, he'd filed for divorce and hired a private investigator to track down every detail of Michelle and Jason's affair. The investigator found hotel receipts going back 14 months, credit card charges for expensive dinners, even airline tickets for weekend getaways Ethan had never known about. The revelation that his marriage was a complete sham, that his brother had betrayed him, that the child he'd been so proud of wasn't his. It broke something fundamental in him. Neighbors told reporters they'd seen him pacing his backyard at 3 a.m, talking to himself. His business colleagues whispered about erratic behavior, missed meetings, decisions that made no sense. I felt no satisfaction watching his world crumble. If anything, I felt hollow. The revenge I'd planned so carefully had worked perfectly, but victory tasted like ash in my mouth. A week after graduation, I was coming home from my job at the bookstore when I found him sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Zoe," he said, standing up as I approached. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I almost said no. Almost walked past him into my building and locked the door behind me. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands shook slightly, made me pause. 5 minutes, I said. We sat on a bench in the small courtyard behind my building. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. A jogger passed by, headphones in, oblivious to the drama playing out on a random Wednesday evening. "You were right to expose it," Ethan finally said. His voice cracked on the words. "I just wish I had protected you sooner. I wish I had been the father you deserved instead of the coward I was." I'd imagined this conversation 100 times, pictured myself cold and triumphant, maybe even cruel. But sitting there beside this broken man who'd raised me for 16 years, all I felt was tired. "For the first time in my life," he continued, "I see guilt in my own reflection. Not shame, not disappointment, guilt. Real honest guilt for how I treated you. For how I let Michelle treat you. For how I stood by and watched Jason manipulate all of us." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, smaller than the one I'd carried to graduation, yellowed with age. "Caitlin left this for you. I was supposed to give it to you on your 18th birthday, but I couldn't. I was too afraid of what it might say about me." My hands trembled as I took the letter. Caitlin's handwriting on the front. For my darling Zoe when she's old enough to understand. She knew, Ethan said quietly. About Michelle. About Jason. She figured it out months before she died, but she never said anything. She wanted to protect you from the ugliness of it all. I opened the letter carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. Caitlin's familiar handwriting filled 2 pages. Words written with the shaky hand of someone fighting a losing battle with cancer. My dearest Zoe. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Ethan has finally found the courage to give you what's rightfully yours. I pray it also means you're old enough to understand what I'm about to tell you. I know about Michelle and Jason. I've known for months. I see the way they look at each other, the careful way they avoid being alone together when others are watching, the guilty way they spring apart when someone enters a room unexpectedly. I could confront them. I could tell Ethan. I could destroy them the way they're destroying our family. But I won't. Because you don't need that poison in your life. You deserve better than to grow up in a house filled with accusations and betrayal and broken trust. You are my daughter in every way that matters. Biology is just science. Love is what makes a family. I chose you, Zoe. I fought for you when Ethan had doubts about adoption. I insisted we bring you home because the moment I saw your picture, I knew you belonged with us. Ethan struggles with showing love. He always has. It doesn't mean he doesn't feel it. It means he's afraid of it. He lost his parents young, and he spent his whole life building walls to protect himself from that kind of pain again. Those walls keep out hurt, but they also keep out joy. Be patient with him. He loves you more than he knows how to show. And when the time comes, and you'll know when it does, help him tear down those walls. You have the strength I never had, the fire I never possessed. Use it to heal, not just to fight. I may not be there to see you graduate, to walk you down the aisle, to hold your children. But I am with you always in every choice you make, every kindness you show, every moment you choose love over fear. You're wanted. You're loved. You are enough. Forever your mother, Caitlin. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Beside me, Ethan was crying too, quiet, broken sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. I failed her, he whispered. I failed both of you. She saw what I was too blind to see, and she protected you in ways I never did. I folded the letter carefully, holding it against my chest like a shield. She loved us both, I said finally. Even knowing what she knew, she loved us. I've updated my will, Ethan said after a moment. You're back in the family trust. You'll get your college fund plus interest. You'll inherit the house, the business, everything that should have been yours all along. I looked at him, really looked, and saw past the expensive clothes and polished exterior to the scared, lonely man underneath. I don't want your money, Ethan. His face crumpled. Then what do you want? How do I make this right? I want you to mean it when you apologize. I want you to actually try to be better, not just feel sorry for yourself. I stood up, Caitlin's letter still pressed against my heart. And I want you to stop calling me by my name like I'm a stranger. I want you to call me your daughter. For a moment he couldn't speak. When he finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. Can you forgive me, daughter? The word hung between us like a bridge being built across years of silence and pain. I thought about holding on to my anger, about making him suffer the way I'd suffered. I thought about Caitlin's words about choosing love over fear. Yes, I said simply. I forgive you. Not because he deserved it. Not because it was easy. But because holding on to pain was just another way of staying trapped in the past. Letting go wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about choosing the kind of person I wanted to be. As I walked toward my apartment building, I heard him behind me, his voice broken but hopeful. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for giving me a chance to be better. I didn't turn around, but I smiled. For the first time in years, the future felt full of possibilities instead of limitations. The lies were finally over. The truth had set us all free. The apartment felt different after that conversation with Ethan. Not bigger, not smaller. Just lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying without realizing it had finally been lifted. I stood at my window that night, looking out at the city lights, and for the first time in my life I felt truly free. Free to make choices based on what I wanted, not what I thought would earn someone's approval. Free to define myself by my own actions rather than someone else's acceptance or rejection. Free to be Zoe, not the adopted daughter, not the replacement child, not the obligation that had been fulfilled, just me. The decision to move out of Ethan's house came naturally after that. He'd offered to let me stay, had even suggested we could start fresh under the same roof. But I knew better. Healing required space and growth required independence. I needed to prove to myself that I could build a life entirely on my own terms. Packing my belongings took only a few hours. 18 years of life fit into 6 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. Most of my possessions were books. Novels Caitlin had given me, textbooks from high school, journals I'd kept during the loneliest years. The rest was just clothes and a few photos of Caitlin and me. As I was cleaning out my desk drawer, I found something I'd forgotten about. A small wooden box Caitlin had given me for my 13th birthday. Inside were keepsakes from my childhood. My first library card, a pressed flower from our garden, a note she'd written when I lost my first tooth. At the bottom of the box was something that made my breath catch. A folded piece of paper in Caitlin's handwriting. It was a list titled "Why We Chose Zoe," written in blue ink that had faded over the years. She has curious eyes, always watching, always learning. Her smile lights up the entire room. She's gentle with the neighbor's cat. She arranged her toys by color without being asked. Organized mind. She said, "Thank you," to the social worker 3 times. She reminds me of myself at that age. Quiet but strong. She needs us as much as we need her. Below the list, in different ink, she'd added, "Ethan finally held her tonight." Really held her. I think he's falling in love too. I sat on my empty bed holding that piece of paper and cried for everything we'd lost and everything we'd found. Caitlin had fought for me before I even knew what fighting meant. She'd seen potential in a shy 2-year-old and decided to build a life around nurturing it. Moving into my own place, a small but sunny studio apartment near campus, felt like stepping into my real life for the first time. I arranged my books on floating shelves, hung photos of Caitlin and me on the walls, and created a space that was entirely mine. No designer touches, no expensive furniture, no pressure to maintain someone else's idea of perfection. The morning after I moved in, I was unpacking the last box when I found Caitlin's journals. I'd rescued them from her bedroom after she died, but I'd never been able to read them. The grief had been too fresh, the loss too overwhelming. Now, sitting cross-legged on my new apartment floor, I opened the first one. March 15th, met with the adoption agency today. They showed us photos of available children. There was one little girl, 2 years old, dark hair, serious eyes. Something about her just spoke to me. Ethan thinks we should consider the infant options, but I keep coming back to her photo. She's been in 3 foster homes already. She needs stability, needs someone to choose her and mean it. March 22nd, Ethan's coming around to the idea. I think he's scared of bonding with an older child, afraid she won't accept us. I told him love isn't something you force. It's something you create, day by day, choice by choice. April 3rd, we're approved. They're arranging visits next week. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about this little person who's about to become part of our family. I bought her a stuffed elephant today, something soft to hold during the transition. Page after page chronicled their journey to me and my journey to them. Caitlin wrote about the first time I laughed in their house, the night I had a fever and let her hold me, the morning I called her Mama for the first time. June 12th, Zoe's been with us 2 months now. She's starting to trust us, starting to believe this might be permanent. Tonight she brought me her blanket when I was sad about my sister's cancer diagnosis. Such a tender heart in such a small person. September 8th, first day of preschool. Zoe was nervous but brave. She held my hand all the way to the classroom, then squared her shoulders and walked in like she owned the place. Ethan said she gets that determination from me. I hope so. Reading those journals was like discovering a treasure map to my own childhood. Every milestone, every struggle, every small victory had been documented with love and pride. I wasn't just wanted, I was celebrated. Every single day. The entries about Ethan were particularly revealing. Caitlin wrote about his slow warming to fatherhood, his awkward attempts at connection, his genuine love buried under layers of fear and insecurity. November 20th, Ethan read Zoe 3 bedtime stories tonight. She fell asleep holding his hand. When I found him later, he was crying. I didn't know I could love someone this much, he said. What if I mess this up? I told him the fact that he's worried about messing up means he won't. Those words hit me like a revelation. Ethan's distance hadn't been indifference, it had been fear. Fear of loving too much, of losing what he loved, of being inadequate as a father. Caitlin had understood him in ways I never could at the time. A week after moving into my new place, I got a call from the Family Support Center downtown. They'd seen the news coverage of my graduation speech and wanted to know if I'd be interested in volunteering with their adoption and foster care program. "We need people who understand what it's like," the program director Maria explained during our meeting. "Kids who can speak from experience about the challenges and the possibilities." I started volunteering that same week. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening I'd sit with small groups of children. Some waiting for placement, others newly adopted, all of them trying to figure out where they belonged in the world. The kids ranged in age from 6 to 17, each carrying their own complicated story. There was Emma, 8 years old, who'd been in 4 homes in 2 years and had stopped believing anyone would keep her. David, 14, who was angry at the world and determined to push away anyone who tried to get close. Sarah, 10, who was perfectly behaved because she thought being good enough would make her permanent. I didn't give speeches or lectures. Mostly I just listened. And when they were ready to hear it, I shared pieces of my own story. "Do you hate your dad?" Emma asked one evening. We were sitting in the center's art room, working on a collage project. Her little hands were covered in glue and glitter, but her eyes were serious. "No," I said, cutting out a paper star. "I used to think I did. But really I was just hurt. And anger felt easier than hurt." "But he was mean to you," she persisted. "At your graduation thing. I saw it on YouTube." I looked at this little girl who'd been rejected more times than any child should be, and I chose my words carefully. "He was scared. Sometimes adults do mean things when they're scared, just like kids do. But that doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't mean you have to keep letting them hurt you. So what do? You decide who you want to be regardless of what they do. You choose kindness even when others choose cruelty. You build your own family with people who love you for who you are." Emma smiled then, a real smile, not the careful one she usually wore. "Can I be in your family?" I felt my heart break and heal at the same time. "You already are, sweetheart. Everyone in this room is family." 3 months after graduation, Ethan showed up at the center during one of my volunteer sessions. I was surprised to see him in the lobby, looking uncertain and out of place among the children's artwork and motivational posters. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said when I approached. "I wanted to see what you're doing here." I introduced him to Maria, who gave him a tour while I finished my session with the kids. When I emerged from the art room an hour later, I found him sitting quietly in the corner, watching a group of teenagers play board games. "They remind me of you," he said as we walked to the parking lot together. "Resilient. Stronger than they know." We started having dinner together after that. Nothing fancy, just quiet meals where we slowly learned how to talk to each other. He told me about his childhood, about losing his parents in a car accident when he was 16, about how that loss had shaped his fear of attachment. I told him about college plans, about my work at the center, about the person I was becoming. "I'm proud of you," he said one evening over Chinese takeout in my little apartment. "Not because of what you accomplished or what you exposed, but because of who you've chosen to be despite everything." Those words would have meant everything to me once. Now they were just nice to hear. A bonus, not a necessity. My worth wasn't dependent on his approval anymore. 6 months after graduation, I received an unexpected package with no return address. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures I'd never seen: me as a toddler, laughing in Caitlin's arms. Me at 3, helping plant flowers in the garden. Me at 5, dressed as a princess for Halloween, standing between Caitlin and Ethan like I owned the world. On the last page was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Asterisk, "Your mother kept these in her bedside table. She looked at them every night before she went to sleep. She wanted you to know how much joy you brought to her life. A friend." Asterisk. I never found out who sent that album, but I didn't need to. It was enough to know that Caitlin's love for me had been so evident that even strangers could see it. Standing in my apartment that day, surrounded by the life I'd built entirely on my own terms, I finally understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't the absence of family or obligation or connection. It was the presence of choice, the power to decide what those things meant to me. I was Zoe Richardson, daughter of Caitlin, and in his complicated way Ethan too. I was a volunteer, a college student, a survivor, a woman who'd learned that the best revenge is simply becoming impossible to ignore. The girl who'd stood on that graduation stage 6 months ago had been fighting for recognition, for acknowledgement, for her place in a family that had never quite felt like home. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was something entirely different. Someone who'd stopped asking permission to exist and started insisting on being seen exactly as she was. That transformation, I realized, was worth more than any diploma. If this story of graduation revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Zoe pulled out that DNA test and watched Michelle's face turn white as she realized her secret was exposed. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.